Okay, this is Vivian John, and she's going to be the narrator. And my name is Connie Richner, and I'm the interviewer. So Vivian, when were you born?
1936, February.
1936.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't remember much about the Depression, or do you remember?
Oh, I remember.
Do you really?
Yes, I remember a lot. My first memory of being a war was my uncle was taken, and he had a Model T Ford. He used to drive us around in rumble seats, and he was the only son, and he had to go. And when they examined him, they said he couldn't be out there where the fighting was. So they made him an ambulance driver. And he said they might as well have stuck him out in the front line because he had quite a go of it. But I can remember that part, and I remember going to the store for Mom and the things we had to buy that was rationed and things we couldn't buy, and it was...
So what things were rationed?
Meat, soap batter, butter. You couldn't buy butter. You had to buy oleomargarine, and it was in a plastic bag, and you broke the coloring, and you had to work the coloring through your... And anything in that order. Sometimes we couldn't even get bread. But Mom made a lot of our bread, so that helped out. But no, I remember the ration stamps we had to carry. Yeah, gasoline was a thing. My dad didn't have a car at the time. But Grandpa would come. Well, I had been born crippled, and they had to take me to Children's Hospital. So I can remember the ration stamps for the gasoline.
Were you in Children's Hospital for a long time?
A long time. I didn't walk till I was almost 5 years old. Both my feet were club feet. And they had to straighten them. They didn't want to operate, so they put cast on them, and every time they changed them, they straightened them a little bit more. So, I hated those casts. Oh my. But they helped. Yeah, they helped, so. And it's amazing now when I see babies that are born like that. It kind of makes me remember.
But now they just do surgery.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times, I don't know, the last few years I've seen a couple babies in the stirrup thing that they put in right away. But I also remember when we were in school, when we'd hear the planes coming over, how we had to dive underneath the desk, and how we had to, they taught us how to bend down to get in there and stay in there. And then at night, when we were at home, we had to draw the blackout curtains because you couldn't show any light, no light whatsoever. And it was a great time, but it was a sad time. We used to have a lot of men killed in that war. A lot of them.
A lot of people that you knew?
Yes. As you said before, we were practically all related, but cousins around. And like I say, my uncle, he survived it. But my grandpa was a Hawks, and he came, he had 12 brothers and sisters. And of course, all of his nieces and nephews. And my grandmother was a cousins, and that's another big family. So we had a lot of people that way that were in. And another thing that I remember so plain was walking by people's home, and it had the flag in the window with the star of how many. And I often think of that. We respected that. Kids nowadays would not respect that little flag. But we did. We would stand there and look at them and talk about it. And if the people come out, we'd talk to them. But that to us meant a great deal. It really did, yeah. Yeah, I just, I don't know why we have to have war. It just, And of course, we all felt that we were in the right and they were in the wrong, but who knows? You never know.
Did you ever think we might lose?
No, that's one thing we always assumed that in the end we were going to come out on top because we were right and we had God on our side. Now that's another thing. During that war, everybody respected the Lord. Nowadays, you don't hear very much of that. Yeah, so.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor Day?
Oh yes, how we danced in the streets.
When the war ended.
Yes, oh my, I lived in a little town down the road called Cadogan.
Mm-hmm.
And the church bells rang all over the country. And the kids got out on the street, and of course some of the adults did their celebrating too. But we really, really celebrated that, yes. Yes, and we couldn't wait for the boys to come home. That was...
And you danced?
Oh, yes. We danced in the street. We didn't have any music, but we made our own. Yeah. Oh, funny times we had. Yeah.
What did your
Yes.
dad do?
My dad was a coal miner while I was a child, and then he got black lung and he had to go to a different type of job, but he was a coal miner.
In Cadogan.
Mm-hmm. He hated it, but he kept his family that way. So, and that was another thing between the war and that coal mine. Boy, you never knew when that whistle was going to blow. You never knew. So.
Were there accidents? Do you remember?
My dad was in one. He was an electrician, and I was in school, and the siren went off, and I jumped up, and I remember I had a male teacher, and he said, "Sit back down." I said, "My dad's in that mine." Boy, I took off, and I got down there as they were bringing him up out. He had been burned. Put him in the ambulance and took him. Oh yes, I remember a lot of those times.
So was he in the hospital for a long time?
No, he was in a couple of days, and then he came home, and we took care of him. Yeah.
And then he went back to work in the mine after
So
that?
he went back, but he didn't work too awful much longer in the mine after that, because he didn't like it to begin with. And then that kind of, he had a friend that, my mom she was a little woman, but she was fierce. And even during the war, we didn't have a washing machine. We scrubbed our clothes on the scrub board.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad was a very particular man. He came home from the mine, he took his shower, he put a white shirt on and dress pants, and that's the way he was around the house. And of course, if his underwear had been gray, he wouldn't have worn it. So he had a friend, Sam Rustin, said to him one time, "Jimmy, if I ever get hurt, you put your underwear on me." And we laughed about that. Yeah, the funny things you do. But that was quite a time. And I can remember when the coal went on strike.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's all we heated with down there. Well, then they didn't allow the coal trucks to come in with coal. And I can remember my dad and Steve Perchali and, I don't know how many of them, Sam Rustin, going out and stopping those coal trucks. They'd make them dump it. And then after they dump it, we kids would go and get it. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sometimes you wonder. But I can remember my Papa and Grandma. I have a picture in there of the house where they lived from Blair. And when he'd come home, the good times we'd have in that front yard, it was just... Of course, he was the only boy. Yeah.
What kind of things did you play?
Oh, well, one thing we did, Grandma grew hollyhocks. I don't know if you know.
I have some, yeah.
I wish I had some. I'm going to get some seeds and try out here. But Grandma had them all along the walk. And of course, you know hollyhocks, you get the bees. Well, our favorite thing was to catch a bee inside one of the hollyhocks and then chase, especially my sister. I love her. She's but chase her and she'd just scream and holler and carry on. But we would play, and I also have a picture in there of the 4 girls of us having a picnic on a little table we had in the backyard. The dogs underneath the table. And, it was just good times. We'd play ball. We'd go chase the chickens. And Pap had a barn where he had one corner that he had the pig in. And he had like a wooden fence up. And we'd climb that wooden fence and get up in the hayloft. And he told us, I don't know how many times about it. He said, that pig bites. And we didn't believe him. And one day our cousin from Vandergrift, the big city, came. And he wasn't very fast, and he bit him. Yeah, Plummy. Plummy got bit on the toe. But no, it was a fierce time, but it was a good time.
What kind of things? Now, you had chickens and a pig.
We had chickens and a pig, and Aunt Sadie lived across the road, and she had a cow. So she had the milk and the butter. And then in the fall, Uncle Raymond Rufner, he had a big farm, and when he'd butcher, we'd get beef from him, and then we'd butcher one of our pigs. So we had the meat for the winter. But Grandma had the eggs, and Aunt Sadie had the butter and the milk. I can remember delivering butter and milk to people, and we walked to do it. And, it was great fun. But and I can remember those uniforms. How I thought my uncle looked so great in that uniform. He was a good-looking man. But no, it just.
Now, did you grow? Did you have a garden?
Oh my, we always had a garden. Even my husband and I, with the 6 kids, we always had a garden. Oh yes, big garden. And I would freeze things in a can and make jelly and make pies and all kinds of things. I just told Debbie today, we got the free food and we got apples in it. And I said, well, make the baby a pie. She loves apple pie. I said, make the baby a pie. So I guess that's what we're going to do this coming week. But it's, it's funny how time goes on, but you still remember the good times. And I can remember when Uncle Blair went, then Aunt Sadie's Buzz went, and there was another one went at the same time. And Blair and Buzz stayed together for a while, but the other one didn't. But they all 3 came home. Yeah, they all 3.
Do you remember when they came home?
I remember Blair coming home. Oh yes, that was a big day. Oh my, we prepared and prepared for days. Oh my, Aunt Sadie and Grandma and them, they baked, and oh my, we had all the family out. In those days you had the family reunions. They were family reunions. And I can remember how they all came to Grandma's, and that front yard was just full. It was, yeah, the good times. Yeah.
So what was your favorite food?
I've always been fond of food, period. Sweets mostly. Mama said when before I went to Children's Hospital, and she'd had me at home and I couldn't walk, she said, I'd be in a playpen, and Daddy would go down the street and he would buy 6 maple rolls every morning. And she said when I'd get to fussing, she'd give me a piece of maple roll. I said, you ruined me, because I can't be near a maple roll to this day. But sweets, that was, of course, that's been my downfall too. But no, I like a good cut of beef every now and then. And I do, I like a steak and salad. But with it, I like my homemade bread. I've been watching my sugar this for quite a while. I went one day, and I wasn't thinking. And he said to me, boy, is your sugar up today? He said, what were you eating? I said, well, I didn't eat anything. Well, my sister had baked bread and I'd eat a slice of that with homemade apple butter. He said, you stay away from that. But now she makes me the apple butter. My daughter makes me the apple butter without sugar.
Just apples.
Yeah, and she makes me the sugar-free jelly. So that's better for me. But yeah, that day that was good with a cup of coffee. That makes a meal.
Mm-hmm.
Or coffee soup. If you remember, during the war, we ate coffee soup. If you didn't have anything else, you had coffee soup.
So tell us how to make coffee soup.
Well, you just take your coffee and you fix your coffee the way you like it to drink. And then you take a big piece of homemade bread. I don't like this bought bread. Homemade bread. And you put your coffee over it and you cover it with sugar. And oh, that makes the best meal. Yes, it does. And well, you know, we didn't have much.
Uh-huh.
And sometimes we didn't have much cereal or that, so. And I can remember it sitting down at the table. And we'd eat what was there, and if we were still hungry, Mom would say, well, fill up on bread, because she and Grandma both baked.
Mm-hmm.
And so but yeah, coffee soup. Oh, my sister will call me every now and then. She says, what are you having for supper? Oh, should I say I'm having coffee soup and bacon? Oh, Lord.
So did she bake once a week, or how many days a week did she bake?
Well, Mom usually only baked once a week because Grandma baked other than her.
Mm-hmm.
But now when I had my kids, I baked twice a week. Yeah, twice a week. I can remember one time my husband didn't work real well, and my sister's husband had always worked, and she had an appointment. She couldn't take her little girl with her. And she come by and she dropped her off, and she said, what are you having for lunch? And I said, we're having lima bean soup, round ham,
Mm-hmm.
and homemade bread. Oh, she said, Robin will never eat that. Well, I said, we'll make do.
Mm-hmm.
Robin loved it. To this day, she still likes her lima bean soup. But they just didn't eat things like that. But that was a meal to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. The first time I baked bread, I was married. I just turned 16. My husband was 19.
And that's when you got married? You were 16?
Mm-hmm. We lived next to this family that had, I think 10 kids. And my husband would get out of the car and he had to walk past their house. And she baked bread all the time and come home. And he would talk about that bread. Oh, it smelled so good. So I thought, well, I can do it. So I walked down to the little store and I got a cake of yeast out and I read the recipe. I bought everything on that recipe. And I went home and he was working afternoon shift. And I baked him the bread. Oh, it was beautiful. Round loaves and just nice. Oh, it was beautiful. He come home. The man next door was out and he went out on the porch with a loaf of my bread. And he said, I was gonna feed it to your dog. But he said if I did, the son of a bee would never hunt this year. He said it's so heavy and he hit it with a hammer. I was crying. Oh, I was so upset that I had tried so hard. So I went up to Grandma's and he didn't like me staying by myself. So when he'd go to work at 1:30, we would walk from our place like 3 miles up to Grandma's, and then Pap would bring us home in the evening. And I told her about it, and she said, well, we'll learn how to bake bread. So she taught me how to bake bread. But Grandma teaches with a pinch of this and a handful of that. And I have never taught my girls to bake bread because they can't understand what I'm doing. But yeah, I'll never forget that bread business.
So did she tell you what it was you did wrong?
Yeah, I put too much yeast in it.
Oh, really?
It called for 2 cakes of yeast.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I put in it.
Uh-huh.
But you only use like half a cake of yeast for 4 or 5 loaves. You don't need 2 cakes.
Uh-huh.
And that's what I did. I put two cakes of yeast in it. Yeah. Life. Oh my. But you know that the boys used to leave on the trains. Now we don't have the train stations anymore. But they had the train station in Katanning and different places around where the boys left, come home. Oh, that was great days when the boys had come home. We'd go even though it wasn't our boy. We went, But it was fun time.
How'd you meet your husband?
My husband and I knew each other all our lives. Actually, I think back somewhere we were probably distant cousins. But he was John, and my grandpa was a Hooks. Grandma and Grandpa Hooks. And they lived on this farm, and Grandpa John had this big farm over here. And he was the meanest little boy you ever seen. I used to come home, I called him all kinds of bad names, and I'd say, I'm going to get him. I'm going to get Grandma. Would say, honey, don't act like that. And my aunt said, here you are married to him. I said, yeah, but his kids will never be as bad as he was. Oh, Lord, yeah. And we just, Grandma, and he only lived, he lived at the end of the road, and then you went up to Grandma, so it wasn't even a mile. And we were around each other all our lives. Then he and my brother worked together. We started dating, and they drove back and forth to work together, so.
Did he get nicer?
Oh, yeah, he got nice. He learned. I taught him, yeah. No, he was an only child for 9 years. And he didn't have to share anything. And he didn't share. Well, I was raised in 6 kids. I mean, you share everything. And I can remember one time we were going out somewhere and we had to stop at his house so he could change clothes and things. And he made himself a sandwich. And he had it on a little plate and set it there on the dining room table. He went in the bedroom for something, and I just picked up his sandwich and took a bite. His mother said, my boys don't eat after anybody else. I said, well, he kisses me, so I don't know why not. And she was mad at me forever. But he learned to share. Yeah, he learned to share. You have 4 kids, you go to the store, you buy a lollipop, you buy 4 lollipops. That's the way it is. That's the way I raised them all their lives.
So you were a welder.
Mm-hmm.
You worked at Toys. You had a restaurant. What was the name of your restaurant?
The Alamo.
Where was it at?
The Vault. The Vault. It was right next to the Alamo.
Uh-huh.
And it was an old. During the war, they built it, and the people would go there and buy their bonds.
Uh-huh.
And there was like every so many feet was a window with bars and that where you bought your bonds.
Uh-huh.
And it was empty. And this friend of mine who was blind and I opened a restaurant in it. And the rest of the building was the FBI building. And it was right next to the Alamo. Yeah, I had that down there for a while.
Now, where was it at?
In San Antonio.
Oh, it's in Texas.
Yeah, San Antonio.
Oh, you mean the Alamo, not...
Yeah, the Alamo.
Wow.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And where were you a welder at?
In the same town.
In San Antonio.
Same town. I went to work at this place, and they were kind of slow, the workers, you know. Well, me, I like to move. So one day I was watching the welder, and I said to him, Louis, show me how to do that. And my girlfriend had went to work there too. And he kind of looked funny at me, and she said, oh, she can do it if you show her how. So Louis started teaching me, and I ended up a welder. One of the girls said to me one time, she said, I'd like to have just one of your paychecks. And I didn't realize until after I retired, and that was when I made my most money, was when I was a welder.
Uh-huh.
But, oh yeah, I worked for Levi Strauss for 6 years. I was a supervisor there. But I've done some good things in my life. I always said when I retired I wanted to work with children.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't drive, I can't see, so what could I do with children? But I am raising my grandbaby here. So that's worth something.
How old were you when you had your first baby?
16, not quite 17. I had 4 and 4.5 years.
Oh my.
I was a busy mother. Oh, was
You
I ever.
must have been.
But I grew up with my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And my dad and I were very close. And when I decided to get married, he told me, "Now you're making your bed. Remember, you've got to lie in it." Okay. And I'd have problems, and I'd go home and talk it over with Dad. And things would get worked out. But nowadays, I think they get married with the thought, well, if it don't work out, I'll get divorced. So I know I have kids that are divorced. And I often wondered, when the first one got divorced, what I did wrong. That's the way life is. Yeah, I had 4 and 4.5 years. And then I lost a couple, and I didn't have any for 5 years. And then I didn't have any for 7 years. The doctor thought I couldn't have any more, and one day I popped up pregnant. And she's my one that passed away. She was 42 when she passed away. So I had a good life with my kids.
So she was a lot younger than the rest of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And she'd lived in Las Vegas for a while, and she moved back to San Antonio, and she was just, didn't want to stay in one place. Well, she was a mechanic, first of all. My husband was a mechanic, and she was a mechanic. She went to school for it and everything. And she moved around a lot. And then she came here and stayed with us, and then she and I got an apartment together, and we were only together 6 months when she died. So she had a motor fall on her, break her wrist, and from then on it seemed like her problems just, one after the other. She had spinal problems and I don't know what all, and the doctor said when she died she'd just taken so much medications throughout the last 6 years that her body couldn't take anymore.
So how did you wind up in San Antonio from Cadogan?
Well, as I say, my husband was a bad asthmatic.
Oh.
And then we moved to Pittsburgh for a friend that he wasn't working too good, and a friend of his went down there, and he knew what a mechanic Daryl was.
Mm-hmm.
And he went to work at this boat place, and they needed a mechanic. So he called Daryl to come down and be interviewed, and when Mr. Gregg interviewed him, he told him he'd send him to school every year. And we moved 70 miles with 4 kids for $2 an hour. $2 an hour, can you believe that? And the kids nowadays wouldn't even sniff at that. And so he sent them to school every winter. And he was a good mechanic. Oh, he was one of the best. And then he got this coughing problem. And at first we thought it was just sinuses, but he started coughing up pieces of his lung.
Mm.
So the doctor said he needs to go to another environment. So they tested him. I thought Arizona would be the one, but no, they said South Texas was where he should go. So the company found him a job in Corpus Christi. So I moved to Corpus Christi. My daughter had her baby. He was only 3 weeks old. And I had Mary Martha was 7 or 8. And a little pickup truck. We followed Dad. He had been down there for a while. And he went to Corpus Christi. Well, we were there a year and a half. And then the company he was working for had another place in San Antonio, and they were closing the Corpus shop. So we moved to San Antonio. We were there 15 years. And his mom and dad got, of course mine did too. And his dad passed away and his mother wasn't well. His lungs were healed enough that we come home. Of course, when he come home, he could never really seem to get adjusted because there wasn't that much work around here for boat mechanics. But he did. He had his own. When he died, he had 9 boats in the front yard. So he had his own shop, but and then he worked for Hellman for a while. And he worked for New Ken for a while. And then he went up here, he sprayed it to Mark Lewis. He was working for Mark when he died, so. I don't know, but I miss him because every time something would happen to the car, of course, he would say to me, well, fix it. Well, living with him for 50 years, I learned enough about the car. He bought me my own toolbox. Don't call home and say you broke down unless you can tell me what's wrong with it. Well, then he'd tell me how to fix it. So that's what I said yesterday. I knew what was wrong with my son's car. But he didn't even have a screwdriver in the dang car to wear. He's not a mechanic in any way. The older son is, but not this one. This one don't like to get dirty. He was a Marine, this one. The other one was a soldier. But he don't like to get dirty. So I noticed his hands, most men's hands. You see a little dirt, not on his. Yeah, he was in the Marines. And he was in Pendleton was the last. He was in Camp Pendleton in California. Darrell was in Missouri. And Darrell lives in Dale City, Virginia. And Keith lives out here in Indiana. So I got them all pretty close.
Well, thank you very much for this.
Probably when you leave, I'll think of a million things I should have told
Nobody
you.
else has talked to us about mining at all.
No.
So, yeah, that's great. That's something we didn't have